Sri Sachidananda Sadguru Sainath Maharaj Ki Jai. Sri Sai Baba and his teachings, third chapter, Sai Baba and spiritual discipline. When we look at the saying of Sai Baba in chapter 14 of Sai Baba the Master, we are astonished to note his promise and protection to his devotees even from his tomb, and the many leelas narrated in the other chapters corroborate them. But regarding the other sayings of Baba, we at first feel that he does not specify any form of spiritual sadhana systematically because we are accustomed to them, as Baba seems to have taught through his discipleship that man needs some occult practices like breath control, chanting of mantra, asanas, meditation, etc., which alone constitute the essentials of path to perfection. But as we see, Baba's Guru enjoined no such to him. As in all things in nature, in sadhana, to the most important ones as in all things in nature, in sadhana too, the most important ones appear like the least important and vice versa. The successful use of any of the above techniques depends ultimately on the seemingly unimportant aspects. But a close study of classics on specific techniques of yoga reveal that yama and niyama, the control of the mind and the senses, are the first steps on which everything else depends. That is why the Bhagavad Gita clearly states that the treasure of positive attitudes, which it designates as Sattva Guna and Daivi Sampada, are the sine qua non for the success of all spiritual endeavor. Buddha's eightfold thought of a middle way also emphasizes the same. The Sermon on the Mount, which Christ expounded to his chosen disciples, refers to the same scheme of values, and it is this which Baba too emphasizes in his sayings. Once we are stabilized in these aspects, any form of sadhana we implement is sure to bear fruit. Besides, the above mentioned techniques of yoga demand training under the guidance of one who attained perfection along that path. It is only by one's good fortune that one can contact such a one, and therefore, as we study the experiences of seekers treading the various paths, we find a majority of them equally dissatisfied and still on the lookout of the missing link. The element of mystery that is associated with these paths hold out for novices the strange fascination. When we study Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, for instance, we first see the technique outlined, followed by the breathtaking list of all the spiritual parts that these practices are said to awaken in us. But as we draw towards the close, we find it clearly stated that the fruitfulness of these yogic practices ultimately depends on the grace of Ishvara, the Lord of the universe. We are back to Sai Baba's call, Allah Malik. Out of these sutras, one stands out permanently in the view of a Sai devotee. It says that the form of a perfect master is very useful object of meditation. Here we are reminded of what Sai Baba did with his own guru quite spontaneously. When we study Hatha Yoga Pradipika towards the end of the text, it is said that all the promised fruits of that yoga can be obtained through the blessings of a perfect master. The last scene in the account of Sai Baba's discipleship flashes in our mind. The classics on the various occults of spiritual disciplines mentioned above warn the seeker against the dabbling with those techniques without proper guidance of an accomplished master. Except for those who are lucky enough to stumble on such a teacher, for all others, the choice is an expression for their craving for power and fame. However, reluctantly, they might profess contrary. Thus, it is this weakness and accompanying over enthusiasm that causes any harm, for it induces him to ignore the details of the necessary conditions and the limits of practice. Above all, their motivation is wrong. Those who run after these practices, ignoring the prior condition that an accomplished master's guidance is necessary, miss the whole point of it. Even if such people were to contact such a master, it is not likely that they will be accepted by him simply for this reason. That probably is the reason why God's creation is so contrived that only those who deserve can meet them. Whether every one of us is such or not is too difficult a question to be solved by oneself. The problem is that we are not genuinely interested in the truth which is central to all spiritual quest. It will therefore be a matter of great wonder if these are not captivated by the tall claims of false teachers. Psychology tells us that all our psychological functions are almost totally influenced by the subconscious drives, fixations that one needs an expert psychoanalyst to analyze them for him. Even then, the patient affords the maximum resistance at precisely those points which he will have to accept. This shows how slippery our deliberate conscious choices could be, and more so with regard to the life of one's sadhana. We have a classical instance of this even in the case of Sai Baba. All through the long period of service of Guru, he hoped that he would receive some mantra from him. But the wise Guru knew better and gave what he deemed his best for the disciple and not what the disciple craved for. The two dimensions of the whole problem stare us in the face, the choice of mode of sadhana and the choice of the appropriate guru. How can we afford to be sure that our choice is right? Who is to testify it, and how reliable is that testimony and the credentials of the one and who testifies? Is life so cheap that we can hope for the best and choose to proceed on trial and error? Without a single known factor, such and such may never lead us anywhere except into the den of false teachers. The picture, fortunately, is not so gloomy for man if we care to recognize it. God is omnipresent and therefore He dwells in the heart of all of us. So proclaim all the Hindu scriptures. Everyone has the Buddha's nature, say the Buddhist scriptures. The kingdom of heaven is within you, and whoever knoweth know himself shall find, says an Egyptian text on Christ's sayings. Whichever direction you turn, there you will find the countenance of Allah, says the Quran, and we are closer to you than ever, your jugular vein, says Allah. By all counts, that Supreme Lord is all wise and all merciful. If we too depend on Him and on His guidance through His messengers, the real masters, it is not possible that we err. If that were possible, spiritual perfection can hardly be what it claims to be. So the proper journey starts with Sai Baba's watchword Allah Malik. If we can impress the full significance of this truth on our hearts, all the noble qualities enjoined by all the world's scriptures follow as a matter of course. Without such a basis, one cannot cultivate them nor graft them. All the statements about these qualities are but interpretations of the different aspects of this in one's inner truth. They are like signposts for us to check up whether we neglected the cultivation of this basic attitude in any aspect of our life. However, positively the various results might promise that God is ever nearest to us, except a few gifted ones, we feel Him as being far away. The intermediary step is the real teacher, and contact with him brings an indubitable validation of this truth. It is in this sense that Jesus Christ said that whoever had seen him has seen God. Again, it is in this sense that Hindu scriptures acclaim the supreme teacher as the Lord himself. For by definition, a real master is he who has realized that nothing belongs to him, and indeed he has no individual self. Striving with our best to impress our hearts with the full significance of Allah Malik is the first step, and contacting a real teacher that suits us is the second turning point. The study of Sri Guru Charitra appeals to the divine within us, and we learn to study it in the proper spirit. Unmistakable guidance comes to us, and at one stroke cuts down the two horns of our question that has perplexed us: the choice of the form of sadhana and the choice of appropriate guru. What helps us in acquiring proper spirit in which to study Sri Guru Charitra is the depth to which we have impressed the spirit of Allah Malik. On the other hand, and the extent to which we could carry the spirit over to every detail of our life, that is, the extent to which we can cultivate the noble qualities to which the sayings of Sai Baba point out, on the other. Similarly, it is the experience of the number of devotees that such study of lives of Sri Manikya Prabhu, Sri Swami Samartha of Akkalkot and Sai Baba, all the Mahatmas were acknowledged as the complete avatars of Dattatreya, equally help us. It is significant that none in this long chain of spiritual masters has initiated anyone with mantra, nor have they enjoined any of the occult yogic disciplines. The message is unequivocal. One technique par excellence is the loving embrace of any of these gurus who had naturally captivated our heart. After glorifying the broad outlines of this sadhana of devotion to the Guru, let us consider the question of working out the implications of Allah Malik into the other aspects of our life. The most important thing is that we should reflect deeply and ascertain what actually matters in our real life. In consequence, all the illusions, fancies, and fantasies retreat like mists in sunshine. The saying of Baba helps us most at this point. Giving up all desires, center your mind on God who is omnipresent, and you will reach the goal. At first sight, to try to commence our mental discipline by consideration and practice of this saying seems to be putting the cart before the horse. It looks quite frightening and almost like killjoy. For on the other hand, we are also told work utter the Lord's name and study sacred books. While being called upon to constantly work, we are told not to desire for anything, not to wish for anything, and not to pray for anything. Another of his saying put this fact more succinctly: one should be content to remain as God has made him. Another of his saying is, do not accept anyone's service gratis. This should be our principle. On this account, we are not even allowed any remission in our diligence. Whatever you agree to do it thoroughly, or else do not accept undertaking. When we do not wish for anything, it would stop mattering to us whether our efforts succeed or fails. What does it matter then if we do not do our best? Do all these sayings signify that one has to live without any joy like a bond slave? What else? Whatever little is left to us by these sayings seems to be taken away, while Sai Baba tells us that we should learn to be like the clouds, the sun, and the earth. For he said to a man who has over crazy about the death of his child, if we could live like this at all, then perhaps we do not need the help of Sai Baba at all. If we look on it from different angle, the picture isn't so bleak at all. We should rather start by considering what is that we really want, what really matters. In our normal life, all of us crave for a sense of security. But what is security? Or rather, what can give us security? Money? How much is it needed to make us feel secure? We cannot really know. In practical life, we say that beyond a certain limit, it only makes a man more insecure. Protecting our material possessions will be our first concern, and the very attempt is fraught with personal danger. We can neither throw it away nor keep a watch over it. Does this represent security? We hope we can guarantee its protection if we have much more of it, and so goes the endless chain. Instead of keeping money in our service, we discover that we have started serving it. Both fame and power are also the same type. The higher the man goes in these aspects of life, the more risky and insecure he becomes. Now, what it is that we want, superficial, however, despite this concentration, it looks as though if we have more money, we can enjoy more comforts and pleasure. But if we think deeply, every one of the comforts exact from us much insight and care. Why do you seem to enjoy pastimes? The word itself clearly reveals we pass time more easily. But what do we mean by that when we resort to any pastime? Time passes much more quickly and without our notice. In times of waiting, anxiety, or gloom, seems to pass much more slowly. From this, we must realize that life is a burden to us because time, as we experience it, means our lifetime. Then, do we wish to die? No. Are we fond of life? Yes. If so, why do we wish it to pass much more quickly and without our notice? On the one hand, we are afraid of death, on the other, we are afraid of life. In such a context, what do we precisely mean by security? We may say that we are not so much worried about our security, but that of our children. Let us think, can we really do anything about it? We are feeding them, giving them medical attention, and to some extent educating them. And at a particular age, they would have to face the same problem over again. Therefore, the future is ultimately not in our hands. We have to realistically think of doing our best to equip them to be self reliant. Any other security that we may provide them to be sure provide them is sure to inhibit their self reliance and cultivate dependence, and dependence on that only, which increase their insecurity becomes a security problem. When we try to provide them some security in terms of financial power, we unwillingly impel them to crave for all those things which are more status symbols and vanities. This ultimately amounts to living unrealistically, trying to impress everyone around them. While being untrue to their own basic needs and impulses, we have ensured nothing but slavery, a false living for them. Is this what we mean by security? Evidently, unless we precisely know what can grant us security, we cannot hope to ensure it for them. Now, in the face of above questions, what is the threat against which we want security? Is it life or death? Unable to resolve this question, we try to forget it, drown it by indulging in pastimes. Under the cloud and confrontation of this irresolvable dilemma, life seems to be too much of burdens and we seek to make it pass quickly. Luckily, we are not sensible enough that the clock of life is ticking, so it is sticking to its end, and we are just passing on the buck from present to the future, thus postponing. How long can we do so? When the hour of death strikes, we will no longer postpone it, and dreadful hour will be thrust down on our throats. In fact, we cannot provide ourselves with any security, for the threat is more psychological than real. What material thing can ever protect us from psychological fears? Basically the threat is an expression of our basic fear. This fear has two sides of it. Fundamentally, it is fear that we cannot protect ourselves. It is realistic to do whatever we can about it, and then realize that unless we create security for ourselves by possessing too much, there is actually no object of threat to our life at all. There are three sources of death: violence, insanity, which leads us fatal crimes of suicide, fatal disease. Keeping our body and mind as healthy and strong as we can is that we all need today, but we know that we cannot do enough. This thought is again a product of our fear. So, unless this fear is eliminated, our problem has no solution. Why are we afraid of death? Have we ever known that it is painful? No. Is it because we think we cease to exist? That should instead make us doubly happy, for we will not be there any longer to suffer. Are we afraid of hell? How do we know that there is such thing? If we say we believe what religions have said, it naturally follows that we should live in such a way that we can escape it. The problem is that we cannot sufficiently believe in the reality of hell as to live in such a way. Then why people die at all? None of these answers has succeeded in removing the fear of death in us. We are afraid because we don't know. We do not know because we have never experienced. Fear is obviously our spontaneous response for what we do not know. Now that we cannot know what it is death, would it solve our problem if we can avert death of our life? If we can avert death permanently? Clearly speaking, it does not, because all through our life we have been trying to pass time. We have been escaping from life and the pastimes, hobbies, gossip, sleep. In fact, all that we can do to escape loneliness is proof of our fear of life. Logically speaking, if we are afraid of death, it should be in that we are very often alive. But in fact, it is not so. We want to live or die. Why are we afraid of life? If we are really fond of life, everything that make us escape the passage of our living time should be an hindrance and nuisance. On the other hand, the time of our life is such and we cannot bear it. By life we mean not life itself, but all those things which enable us to escape it. Escape can never be pleasure because it is unrealistic, and all things that give us pleasure in our normal life are precisely such, except, of course, the appeasement of hunger and sex. They are only urges, and their satisfaction releases the tension, and we experience it as pleasure. But none of the other things are such natural impulses, except in the sense that it is natural for man to seek escape from life. The marvelous fact is that none of the other living creatures seem to have this problem. Life cannot logically mean the means of escape from it. The very fact that we love the latter shows that we do not love the former. But the irony of life that is that we cannot permanently escape life. One who mistakenly thinks that he can is the one who drains his life in alcohol and drugs. Even that is not a fact. Every time a man drinks, he does not remain happy and contented. Now he is angry, now he weeps. Whatever moods confront him in real life confront him there too. And even the drug addicts confess that every tip is not invariably pleasurable. It depends upon several factors, and these factors are in himself. The question has not been solved that way. Back to our question. Unless we overcome the fear of life, we cannot cease to run for means of escape from it. Every means of escape from life, that is, every form of pastime, cannot help us for long. We need a change. In order to have all the varied forms of pastimes, we need so many things and ultimately money. The quest on wealth depends upon opportunities, and opportunities do not always come up. It is not always that our effort clicks. All the sweat and toil we face in this process might eat away the figment of pleasure that we derive at the other end. Besides, such an incessant greed does not end at all. It distorts our whole personality and stature, and the warmth of human life in this becomes more valuable than human relationship. One cannot hope to hoard. Utter loneliness and inner sense of isolation is the price we have to pay in our slavery to money. There can be no sharing even when we pass it on to next generation. It is more like shaking off the burden from our hands in sense of responsibility and never an expression of warm love. In the pursuit of money, we are forced to deprive our children of all the warmth of our association. Then can we say that we love them enough simply because we hold for them? We are aware, though dimly, that in transferring a big bank balance to them, we transfer our anxiety. That it is not genuine warmth or love that prompted us is shown by the fact that most of the people who do so in their old age feel that they have been cheated in life and their children are not grateful enough for what they did. It may be true that they are not grateful enough, or else can they be? When we denied them human warmth and tried to pass on the buck instead, unknowingly we have considered them a burden to be taken off our hands, to be bought off their needs with money. It is in the fitness of things that they should feel that we are a burden to them, and we are only fit to be bought off our needs with a little money. What right have we to complain? Even when we have done that, nothing has changed in our life. We have to live without a basic problem. We are afraid of life and we are afraid of death. All we have to do in our life, besides eating and sex, is of desperate effort to realize contentment and peace. The absence of these two is what we term fear. It is these two which, of all practical purposes, one can take to be synonymous and henceforth call contentment is what we mean by security. Our life experience proves that worldly security without contentment is no security at all. It is only another form of slavery and imprisonment. The pleasure which pastimes seem to afford us is the nearest approximation to contentment which we can have in our daily life, and therein lies their charm, therein hold on us. During those During those moments, we forget all sense of insecurity and our cares for our children and their future. Obviously, these are the things from which we sought an escape. But this did not satisfy us because they make us more dependent on the means of getting them and they are not lasting. By contentment, we mean contentment which do not stale or fade or satiate us. The lives of millions of people all the world over as many tales of desperate search for that attainment, but we hardly see anyone who has achieved whatever less he might have achieved in life. Does it mean that such a thing does not exist at all? That it is a figment of our imagination? Dare we believe so? If we could, the problem is solved. No more search. One who has dropped off craving for such a for contentment has conquered fear. It is only the other face to it. Such a one does not need pastimes at all because, as we have noted earlier, man resorts to them as next best thing available to him, the only way out of his unappeased hunger for contentment. We dare not believe that such a thing as contentment does not exist. Here we have a hope held out by nature, and from thence we derive the incurable hope that we have on arriving at contentment that sets us in search of a way. In deep, dreamless sleep, we enjoy peace and contentment. In that state, there is no threat, security is no problem, and hence there is nothing that we need. There is no need even for pastimes. When we feel sleepy, even the best of pastimes loses its charm for us. Whence does it become? Our waking experience shows us that every experience reaches us through the senses and the mind. But in the deep sleep, all these six gates to our inner self are completely closed, and the peace we get in the sleep obviously could not have come through any of them. As far as we know, there are no other gates through which it could come. The only alternative is that it has not come at all. It simply has been there within us. Where and how then could it go? How could it vanish during hours of wakefulness? Something which has been there all the time cannot go or vanish. If it does, we should be able to discover how or whence it returns the next time when we sleep. The wise ones have given us an answer. Man is like a trough of water. We are the trough, man is the water, and bottom, which has always been there, is the peace. When the water is still, the bottom is perceived as such, but when it is agitated, it escapes our notice. It has not gone anywhere, we simply are not able to notice it. In wakefulness, the mind is like the agitated water. It hides the peace which is in us from our attention. The problem of our life is that the peace which we know for certain, which exists and is available, escapes us when we are awake. Any yearning for peace or contentment is to have peace of deep sleep even when we are awake. The peace of our sleep has not come through any possessions, acquisitions, or pastimes. Logically, we cannot hope to get through these in wakefulness too. The solution lies in learning to still the mind when we are awake. That is the art of meditation. And indeed, Hindu mystics have aptly called it Jagrat Shushpati, that is natural state of a perfect master. People marveled how a narrow wooden plank, 4.5 cubits long and a cubit wide, which was suspended from the roof of the mosque with the help of four thin worn out pieces of cloth, could bear the weight of Baba's body. Baba explained that only those who can sleep with their eyes wide open can sleep like that. So too we have the instance of Sri Swami Samarth of Akkalkot, who, while on one hand deeply asleep and snoring, was also ever alert on that every passing thought of his nearby devotees. See The Supreme Master by the author. All the real masters I met also were capable of responding with the fullest awareness when they were apparently in deep sleep. Indeed, we can take this as one of the major standards of recognizing such a one. The Bhagavad Gita testifies that a yogi is ever awake even in that state, which is deep slumber to all other creatures. This implies the possibility of the peace of deep sleep being achieved even in the waked state. In fact, all the great mystics say rudiment of consciousness subsists even in deep sleep to all of us. because it is only rudimentary, only we are not conscious that we are conscious in deep sleep. The whole question of perfection can be said to revolve about the attainment of consciousness that we are conscious. Those who attained in perfect consciousness in sleep, or those who have attained the state of waking sleep even in wakefulness. They remain perfectly conscious even in death, and hence it is no death to them. It is not even sleep. In all cases, this rudimentary consciousness in deep sleep is a bit more active in dream, but it fluctuates from time to time. For that reason, we sometimes remember our dreams and sometimes we do not. The strangest thing is that the case is much the same even in our waking. For most of the time we are conscious, but we are conscious for our consciousness only to a mild degree. This fact is what causes to slip from heights of our spiritual understanding into day-to-day life. In spiritual practice, our mind wanders from our practice like any moving material object. This found us unconscious of consciousness of for a certain moment and direction on which depends when we are going to recognize that our mind has strayed from our practice and resume it. So too the cycling process. A spiritual process has initial momentum and direction which determines how long we will be able to keep it up before we stray from it. All spiritual practice consists in strengthening the initial momentum of spiritual practice on the one hand and reducing the momentum of phenomenon of straying on the other hand. Buddhism calls the former practice of attention or awareness, that is mindfulness, and latter the practice of the eightfold path. Theistic spiritual disciplines like Sufism, Christianity, mysticism describes this as a practice of presence or nearness of God. These traditions describe the latter phenomenon as the sins and the machinations of the devil. However, all the mystical schools admit that this practice is very effective with the subtle help and the powerful protection of a real master like Sai Baba. The seemingly unsolvable problem of fear of death and fear of life no longer exists. But the question arises how long we can remain in the state of meditation during the day. If we try to do so, can we attend to our worldly life? Initially, this problem will be real. But as we go on practicing the meditation regularly during chosen hours, as we grow more and more familiar with it, it starts persisting even in the midst of our worldly activities. Subjectively, we experience it as a kind of profound peace that stalks us all through the day. This phase of development can be beautifully explained with an analogy. When a person is still learning to balance himself on a bicycle, that is in the initial stages, if someone talks to him, either he has to get down to avoid the loss of balance and a fall, or if he concentrates more on his balance, he will not be able to attend to what we are saying. But with practice, when he has mastered the state of balance, he can go on talking and thinking even while keeping up his balance. The phenomenon can be psychologically explained. Just as there persists a rudiment of consciousness in our normal sleep, a rudiment of unconsciousness or sleep persists in our relative waking too. It is under its influence that we carry on most of our instinctive, habitual, and routine actions. The rudiment of unconsciousness gives way when we are faced with even a problem, when we make our choice less under the influence of our set emotional attitudes. We are acting under the influence of rudimentary semi consciousness, dream state that also persists in our waking. The dream state permits of better awareness than sleep, but it does not permit of further insight or analysis. Therefore, in our waking state, when we try to reshape our whole attitude to life in the light of a teaching like Allah Malik, by analyzing our basic attitude to life, to pastimes, and only then the real conscious phase of our waking consciousness is at work. From this, we learn that most of us are really awake in its fullest sense. The Sanskrit word viveka literally means this clear state of wakefulness, in the light of which the rudimentary but much more dominant dream consciousness and the rudimentary sleep state vanish like mist and we are to that extent liberated from the strange hold of set patterns of thinking, feeling, and action. Thus, we see that the process of deeply immersing the fullest significance of Baba's teachings through the study of his life, the reflection of his teaching, and analysis of the kind I have sampled here together constitute this process of strength and enlarging the state of clear consciousness in making. We have seen how, through practice, to learn to attend to our daily tasks and yet keep up the state of meditation all through wakefulness. It was to help this process in his devotees that Baba always demonstrated his identity with all the creatures, humans and otherwise, that they contact all through the day, and also that he was continuously aware of every thought that passed through the mind of every one of them. In the light of these experiences, they are forced to live in clear consciousness of the waking state. He further brings this process in them, he further brings this process in them by showing that he was aware of everything that happened, even in their dream states. This is in fact the real master's way of working of his devotees, freeing them out of the set ways of their thinking, feeling, and action. Thus, at every stage, the devotee of such a real master is confronted with ever new masters who are not capable of this. Thus, at every stage, the devotee of such a real master is confronted with ever new dimensions of his own self and of nature around him. The fake masters who are not capable of this pretend to work on their followers by just talking the nonsensical gibberish in the name of shaking them out of their habitual selves. Masters like Ramana Maharshi seek to teach us this clear consciousness in making through self inquiry. In practice, however, most of us feel that every time we try to attend to self inquiry, we have to choose between our daily activities and spiritual practice. But in the method employed by Sai Baba of Shirdi, we are forced to return to clear consciousness by every miraculous experience we get from him, almost hourly and daily. It is in a unique way that that even in our normal lives we are made to realize it. It will now possible to understand why we are afraid of life and death. As we said, we are afraid of what we do not understand, what we do not know. Even with regard to such pleasurable experience as sex, to which all of us are irresistibly drawn, then there persists a mysterious fear of orgasmic pleasure. This fear manifests itself either in premature ejaculation or delayed ejaculation or ejaculation which is weak and not fully satisfying. The reason is that at the moment of orgasm, the ego is overwhelmed by the id or the pleasure principle, and subjectively we experience a temporary loss of ego consciousness, which are ego dreads. The therapy consists in helping a person out of this fear through its release and familiarization. We can see the parallel between orgasmic experience of the temporary loss of ego consciousness in flood of pleasurable experiences and the mystic rapture that result from realizing the fullest significance of Allah Malik. The presence of erotic sculpture in places of worship, that is Hindu temples, reveals the recognition of this quest parallel between these two aspects of life. It is only during these two states man realizes the organic unity with all life and with all existence. Coming back to our central theme, we are afraid of life because we do not know what life is. That is, we do not know what we are. All pastimes and such other modes of escape are really escapes from our true self. The clear state of consciousness, which we call waking sleep, is our fundamental nature, the bottom of the true. In our daily life, nothing is foundation of the man and the intellect, a psychological process. As we have noted earlier, it corresponds to the rudimentary dream state which persists in our waking, because we learn of the perennial presence of peace as our true self in the hours of sleep. During wakefulness, we intimate or unconsciously remember that peace is a definite possibility. But the rudimentary dream consciousness of the waking state cannot comprehend it because it constitutes, so as to say, the ejection of the whisper called the mind which hides it. Only when the former is transcended in peace realized, this is what the mystics have described as the death of our former self unto the world as we now experience it and birth in spirit. Common ring of a mankind lives in a state of relative death or total awareness of the related, whereas those who have tasted awakening of clear consciousness with the help of a real master dedicate our life to the spirit. It is in this sense that the Christ says to a disciple who wanted to bury his dead kinsman before responding to his call, let dead bury the dead. Again, it is in this sense that Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that the whole army of Arjuna's opponents in Mahabharata war were already killed by him, and the latter only is to act as an instrument in discharging its function. Rudimentary dream state which persists in waking is what functions in the process of knowing in our normal wakefulness, but this has to get dissolved in realizing the clear consciousness of waking. Ego consciousness is the total picture of the rudimentary dream state in waking. Hence, the ego dreads its own dissolution. It is for this reason that those who dabble in spirituality prefer to crowd around false teachers to keep them busily occupied with the functions of rudimentary dream consciousness in waking in the name of teaching them. They dare not test the credentials of their teacher, for if they do so, it logically means that they should be ready to face the dissolution of their ego consciousness. They wander from guru to guru, or what is worse, can be hanging on to the false, loquacious teacher who holds them in slavery by merely baffling their normal consciousness through complicated manipulations of the same with the help of his bizarre teaching. Basically, teacher himself is afraid of such a realization but rationalizes his escape from it by trying to prove that every other real master has erred at some stage or the other and desperately tries to have people crowding around him. Such one who has never served a real teacher as Sai Baba has served his own. Therefore, they feel it an affront to their own image to acknowledge that their realization is the fruit of another real teacher's grace. The idea of proclaiming themselves as born devotees of mankind and avatars of the age provides them with convenient venue of escape. They rationalize their escape and stand in need of constantly being assured of it, apart from their claim of teeming crowds of disciples. This kind of spiritual narcissism is striking by its total absence on the real teacher or the avatar. That they are not avatars by any stretch of our imagination is shown by the fact that real teachers like Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi have emphatically stated that the state of realization of a perfect master and that of an avatar are identical. If anything, the real master is in higher state in the sense he is not conditioned even by the exigencies of divine to worldly mission. He represents God as he is in himself by his own Maya or the power of cosmic illusion so as to fulfill his divine mission of mankind. It can be seen from the Bhagavad Gita that no perfect sage like Sukha even bothered to visit the greatest avatar Lord Krishna. To the devotees and to the rest of the mankind, he might be divine and mysterious, but to Sukha, there is only the self. Nothing comes and nothing goes. There is nothing mysterious about it. It is natural. Not knowing this, the false teachers encash the popular fascination in the concept of avatar and seek to impress upon them that the avatar of the age is superior to Sadguru. Some of those who believe this quote the relevant statements of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, which apparently seems to support their pet view. The fact is the Paramahamsa in his characteristic obtrusive manner was revealing that he was such an avatar but either directly or indirectly to draw the millions of people to the path spiritual. People mistake this statement because they think that only 10 avatars that are commonly known are the only ones acknowledged by our ancient sages. If we to look at the various Puranas, the number of avatars is differently mentioned as 10, 18, 21, of whom Lord Dattatreya, that is God come real teacher, is one. In fact, the Puranas say that the Pravirbhavam or avatar or infinite in spirit, the enlightened one, knows the truth that the whole existence is one perpetual avatar of the Lord and the rest is divine people, and that the perpetual avatar is his own self. Through this intuition of the possibility of peace, our normal self also knows that it is not its true nature, but it does not know what our true nature is. This awareness that it is not our true nature matters itself in our desperate and incessant search for peace. It is ignorance of our true nature, that is our ignorance of what we really are, and it is the same self ignorance of what life is in our common wakefulness is the essence of fear of life and death. It needs a lot of preparation and familiarization for it. To accept the fact of this familiarization is what we have called the preparation. Now, what is it that we need in life? Security. We have seen that it is only a reflection, a concept of the ego, that is, the rudiment of dream state in wakefulness, and hence it can never objectively be realized. In the worldly sense, when the bottom of the trough is realized, there is no more fear, no insecurity, and therefore no need of striving for security. Security is what is peace and contentment, God or the self. It is for this reason that the most of Hindu idols of Godhead invariably have gesture of fearlessness or freedom from fear, or else they have those symbols which represent the preparation of attainment of that state, like the rosary or scripture or trident, which represents the yogic path. Now that we realize it that nothing gives us security except the realization, the only thing which we need to wish for is that and nothing else. This is what Sai Baba meant when he said, giving up all desires, center your mind on God. Then you will surely reach the goal. Not wishing for things is not so gloomy. For in wishing for things of the world, we forget only the source of security and run for the source of insecurity, toil, and disillusionment. All the other things of Baba we have mentioned at the beginning of the chapter represent the preparation. As we noted in the first chapter, the appreciation of the full significance of Allah Malik gives us courage and freedom and the wisdom to look upon all our life experiences or the means of Supreme Master in preparing our soul for the final experience. All efforts and work will no longer be motivated by desire for fruits of action. We will learn to look upon it as means of strengthening our efforts to keep up clear consciousness in the midst of the activity. By utter Lord's name, the second phrase in one of these sayings, Sai Baba meant that He is the work. We should strive to impress upon our hearts the full significance of Allah Malik whenever we can. This phrase represents the theory and the earlier word work represents the practice. The third part of the statement is preparation at the psychological level. Such a one neither hopes nor aspires, neither wishes for anything nor does he reject. He lives life as a game, as an end in itself, and it is the game that keeps us in the highest state of alertness. Both victory and defeat are the false. The thing that matters is our alertness and the activity. It is in this spirit that God is said to create spontaneously like play. It is important to note that Lord Krishna sets himself up as a model for karma yogic, playing his activity for work. But it is not such in the sense it is not motivated by desire for anything. In the light of this discussion, it is easy to see that when Baba said, be content to remain as God has made you, and what God gives lasts and the man gives never, have a double meaning. Desiring something in the hope of security, either from worldly necessity or from the psychological thinking, is constant effort to be something different from what God has made us. The ego consciousness, through such analysis as we have illustrated and through the teaching of the real master, learns not to wish for anything. We are learning to be what God had made us. Play is no play when we are not able to play our best. It is in this sense that Sai Baba has said, whatever you undertake to do, do it thoroughly or else do not undertake. Jai Sai Master.